There was a man who lived by a simple, hard-won truth. If you wanted something done right, you had to do it yourself. He believed in the strength of his own two hands, the precision of his own eye, the unwavering focus of his own mind. And for a long time, he was right. Under his careful watch, by his tireless effort, things did get done. Machines hummed, parts fit, lines moved. He was the anchor, the steady hand in the storm, the one you could always count on to shoulder the burden. But what he built largely alone. And things built by one man, no matter how strong, no matter how capable, carry a silent fragility. They stand, often admired, but sometimes isolated, a monument to a single will, not a foundation for something larger, something lasting, something truly resilient. He hadn't yet learned that real influence, the kind that endures, isn't about how much you can carry, but about how many hands you can teach to carry with you. His name was Lester. 48 years old, though the decades spent under the fluorescent glare of the factory floor had a way of adding extra years to a man's count, not on his birth certificate, but in the deep grooves around his eyes, the slight stoop in his shoulders. He was a factory man, through and through, the kind of man whose life revolved around the steady, relentless pulse of machinery. For 30 years, he'd clocked in at the same plant, a sprawling metal behemoth that produced components for heavy equipment, parts that would eventually end up in tractors, forklifts, earth movers, doing the grunt work of the world in places he'd never see. Lester wasn't tall, but he carried himself with a quiet heft, a compact density forged from years of lifting, bending, and the subtle, constant exertion of demanding physical labor. His work clothes, always clean but never new, hung on him like a second skin, faded blue and gray, often speckled with grease that had become a permanent part of the fabric like tiny, oily badges of honor. He had a full head of salt and pepper hair, meticulously combed each morning, a small defiance against the industrial chaos that defined his days. But it was his face that truly told the story. It wasn't a face prone to easy smiles or quick frowns. It was a landscape of experience, lines etched around the corners of his mouth from silent observations, and deeper furrows on his forehead from years of focused concentration. His eyes, though, those were the most telling. A deep, unassuming brown, they seemed perpetually tired, as if they'd witnessed too many sunrises from the wrong side of a warm bed, yet they were sharp, missing nothing. They had that particular kind of clarity that comes from years of scanning dashboards, checking gauges, spotting the minuscule flaw in a weld that others would overlook. They were the eyes of a man who saw the world in processes and tolerances, who understood the intricate dance of cause and effect with an almost instinctual certainty. He could read a machine's mood just by the pitch of its hum, predict a breakdown by the slightest tremor in its rhythm. And his hands, oh, Lester's hands. They weren't soft, manicured hands. They were the hands of a working man, thick-palmed and scarred, the knuckles swollen and stiff, a testament to countless hours grappling with wrenches, pulling levers, and guiding hot metal. There was a faint tattoo on his left forearm, a blurred, faded anchor from his younger days, a symbol of stability that had somehow transferred itself to his very being. These hands moved with an almost surgical precision, a natural extension of his will. He could disassemble a complex hydraulic pump blindfolded, or feel the slightest vibration in a bearing that signaled impending trouble long before the alarm bells even considered ringing. They were hands that communicated competence without a single word, hands that offered a silent promise. This will get fixed, this will get done. He was dependable, unwavering. You could set your watch by Lester. His locker was always tidy, his tools always organized, his workstation spotless even amidst the surrounding industrial grit. He didn't engage in the idle chatter that filled the break room, didn't join the discussions about weekend football or the latest political squabble. If you asked him a direct question about a machine, you'd get a direct answer, usually brief, always accurate, spoken in a voice that was low and steady, like the deep thrum of a well-maintained engine. But beyond that, he was a man of few words, perceived by many as a stoic, almost unapproachable presence, a quiet observer, a constant fixture, a rock in the churning river of the factory floor. He was a man who carried his strength not on his sleeve, but in the solid weight of his presence, the quiet competence of his actions. He was Lester, and he was good at what he did. Perhaps too good in a way he hadn't yet understood. There's a silent, stubborn pride in being the one who can fix anything, the one everyone turns to when the gears seize. A man builds his worth on it, brick by weary brick. But sometimes, a builder gets so good at laying his own bricks, he forgets to look up, to see if the structure around him is truly rising, or if he's just patching holes in a foundation meant for more hands than his own. For Lester, 48 years old, that foundation was the factory floor, a symphony of roaring machines and clanking metal that began long before dawn. His internal clock was set tighter than any industrial timer. The alarm blared at 5 a.m., a shock to the quiet of his small, well-maintained house in the older neighborhood. Brenda, his wife, would stir beside him, but he was already halfway out of bed, the weight of the day pressing down before his feet even hit the worn rug. Coffee, quick shower, the same worn lunch pail, and his even more worn Carhartt jacket smelling faintly of machine oil and honest sweat. He'd grabbed the keys to his old pickup, the one with the dent in the fender he'd meant to fix for years, a testament to a dozen small procrastinations. The pre-dawn streets were quiet, save for the occasional delivery truck. He'd passed the closed diner, its neon sign dark, the sleeping houses, each window a dark rectangle holding its own dreams and worries. He'd think of Brenda, still warm in their bed, and of Mike, probably still asleep, the weight of his son's uncertain path a dull ache in Lester's chest. The factory lights, a harsh white beacon in the distance, slowly grew larger, pulling him in, a gravitational force he'd felt for decades, punching in the air already thick with the metallic tang of industry and the faint smell of coolant. The roar of the presses, the hiss of hydraulics, the rhythmic clang of metal on metal, it wasn't noise to Lester. It was a language he understood, a complex symphony he moved through without conscious thought. His station, clean and organized with tools laid out in perfect order, awaited him. He was a machinist, and he knew his machines like extensions of his own arms, his own mind. Day in, day out, the same motions. Loading the raw material, setting the precise cut, inspecting the finished piece. 1,000 times, 10,000, 100,000, each piece had to be perfect. Not just good enough, but perfect. His hands, calloused and strong, moved with an almost surgical precision, honed over decades of repetition, of muscle memory becoming instinct. He was a craftsman in a factory, finding artistry in the consistent, flawless output of his labor. Perfect meant pay. Pay meant the mortgage on the little house, the one Brenda made a home, filling it with warmth and the scent of her baking. It meant keeping the bills from piling too high on the kitchen counter, each envelope a reminder of the relentless churn of life. It meant groceries, and the ever-present tuition for Sarah, now a nurse, though Lester was still chipping away at those student loans, quietly, persistently. And it meant a little extra for Mike, still trying to find his footing, still needing a hand up more often than he let on. Sarah, she was doing well, truly making her own way, but even her success was built on years of careful saving, of Lester working every overtime shift he could get his hands on, every holiday bonus stretched thin. The weight of that responsibility settled heavy on his shoulders, a weight he bore without complaint because that's what a man did. There was a quiet pride in the hum of a machine he'd tuned, the flawless glint of a component he'd just finished, identical to the last and the next. A quiet pride in knowing that if the line went down, if a complex problem stumped the younger guys, he was the man they'd call. And he'd step in, usually with few words, assessing the issue, his brow furrowed in concentration, then solving it with an efficiency that made it look easy. He saw the gaps, the inefficiencies, the mistakes others made. And instinctively, he'd step in, not with a lecture, but with a swift, capable action, fixing it himself, ensuring the line kept moving, minimizing downtime. It felt faster, more reliable to simply do it himself. It was his way of ensuring quality, of upholding his unspoken standard. But beneath that competence, a flicker of something else stirred. A fear, sometimes, that all that reliability made him invisible, that his quiet efficiency would be taken for granted. He never asked for praise, never sought the spotlight. That wasn't his way. But sometimes, late at night, when the house was quiet and the soft glow of the street lamp filtered through the bedroom window, a whisper of a forgotten dream would surface. A what if from a younger Lester who'd imagined something more, something beyond the constant hum and grind of the factory floor. He'd pushed those thoughts down over the years, buried them under the weight of bills and responsibilities, convinced they were simply impractical notions for a man like him. He'd built his life, his family's security, on his own two hands, literally. From fixing the leaky faucet at home to troubleshooting the temperamental press at work, he was the guy. It was efficient, yes, to just do it himself, to step in and correct rather than teach, to carry the load. But it was also lonely. It meant carrying the full weight, every problem, every solution resting solely on his shoulders. He didn't realize it then, but this self-reliance, his unwavering strength, had also become his invisible cage. He believed he was building strength, building a fortress of competence, but he was really just building a burden. A burden he'd grown accustomed to, a burden he didn't know how to set down because who else could carry it? Who else would? Others saw him as aloof, perhaps. Unapproachable. But he was observing, he was calculating. He was simply not built for small talk, not wired for idle chatter that often felt hollow. He kept his own counsel, his own needs unvoiced. Brenda knew. She saw the lines etched deeper around his eyes, the subtle slump in his shoulders that came from years of bending over machines, of carrying unspoken loads. But Lester wasn't one to complain. He was a man who believed you just kept showing up, kept doing the work, and eventually things would work themselves out. A strong sense of unspoken responsibility for everyone around him, for the smooth running of the whole operation, pulsed beneath his quiet exterior. It was a good thing, he thought, a necessary thing. But it left him, in a way, standing alone, even in the crowded, noisy heart of the factory. And sometimes, in those fleeting moments between tasks, a quiet emptiness echoed, a silent question about the true purpose of all his solitary strength. That solitary strength, that quiet fortress Lester had built around himself, was about to face its first real test. It didn't come with a bang or a crash, but with the fumbling hands of a new kid on the line. Danny, barely out of high school, full of nervous energy and eager smiles, was the latest recruit. He had the kind of bright, hopeful eyes that hadn't yet learned the weight of the world, eyes that reminded Lester of a reflection he hadn't seen in decades. Danny was a whirlwind of enthusiasm, but his hands, though quick, weren't yet precise. He struggled with the new machine, a finicky press that required a delicate touch and an understanding of its rhythms. Time and again, Danny would misalign a part, jam the mechanism, or scratch a finish. He'd curse under his breath, a flash of red on his cheeks, then try again, his brow furrowed in concentration. Supervisors, already stretched thin, offered curt corrections, their patience worn to a thread. Lester watched, as always. He saw the frustration building in Danny, the way his shoulders slumped a little more with each mistake, the way his hopeful eyes started to dim. He saw the kid pushing himself, trying harder, but somehow always just missing the mark. One afternoon, the air in the factory felt thick with impending trouble. Danny had just ruined a batch of parts, a costly error that brought the line to a grinding halt. The floor supervisor, a man named Henderson whose face was usually set in a permanent frown, stalked over. Henderson's voice, when he spoke, was low, dangerous. "Danny," he said, "this isn't working out. This is your last warning. One more mistake like this and you're gone." Danny stood there, an unholy mix of shame and despair washing over his young face. His hands, usually busy, hung uselessly at his sides. For a split second, Lester didn't see Danny. He saw a younger version of himself, a kid fresh out of school, stumbling, desperate to prove himself, wishing, praying for just one person to slow down, to show him the why, not just the what. He remembered the sting of unspoken disappointment, the silent knowing that he wasn't quite good enough yet, and the isolating belief that he had to figure it all out himself. A pang, sharp and unexpected, pierced through Lester's usual stoicism. It wasn't pity, not exactly. It was recognition, a memory of a ghost he thought he'd long buried. That night the clock radio glowed 3:17 a.m. Lester lay awake, Brenda a soft, even presence beside him, her breathing a familiar comfort. But for Lester, there was no comfort, no sleep. His mind was a relentless treadmill, replaying Danny's face, Henderson's harsh words. The quiet emptiness he sometimes felt in the factory now filled his small, tidy bedroom. He stared at the ceiling, the familiar cracks in the plaster taking on new, unsettling patterns in the dim light. What had he become? Lester, the man who fixed everything, the man who took pride in doing it right the first time, every time. The silent strength, the unyielding dependability. He built a life on that, a good life, a solid house, raised 2 decent kids. But tonight, that strength felt less like a pillar and more like a prison wall. He'd always believed in doing it himself because it was efficient, because it ensured quality, because who else would do it right? But looking back, how many opportunities had he missed to really connect, to lift someone else up? He'd carried the burden himself all these years without a second thought, seeing it as his duty, his quiet sacrifice. But tonight, the sacrifice felt heavy, suffocating. He saw Danny's despair, and a question formed, cold and clear in the pre-dawn silence. Was his way, this solitary competence, truly the best way? Or was it just his way of avoiding the messiness, the inefficiency, the vulnerability of trusting someone else, of truly empowering them? He'd carried his own unspoken needs and fears for so long that they'd become part of his skin. The fear of being overlooked, of becoming redundant, had subtly driven him to be indispensable, to take on more and more. But what had it cost him? A deeper connection, a shared load. A sense of true belonging beyond just being the guy who always got the job done. A profound weariness settled over him, deeper than the physical exhaustion from a long shift. It was a weariness of the spirit, a quiet lament for all the years he'd spent building his own cage of competency, of responsibility. He thought of Mike, his son, still finding his footing, still searching for direction. Had Lester's quiet strength, his unwavering self-reliance, communicated something unintended? Had he shown them how to do, but not how to build with others? The thought gnawed at him, a raw, brutal honesty that stripped away layers of habit and pride. He was a man adrift in his own well-ordered life, surrounded by people, yet utterly alone with his burden. And for the first time in a very long time, Lester didn't just feel tired, he felt truly, profoundly stuck. This stuck feeling wasn't a sudden explosion, mind you. No, it was more like a slow, deep crack forming in the bedrock of his routine, subtle at first, then widening, letting in a cold draft he hadn't felt before. It started as these things often do with someone else's problem. Jesse, young kid, maybe 21, fresh out of some technical program, full of bounce and big ideas. Too much bounce if you asked Lester. Jesse was assigned to the line that fed the main assembly, a critical spot, and he was consistently making a mess of it. The widgets weren't lining up right. The machine kept jamming. Lester watched him from his own station, the constant clatter of the factory floor a familiar hum. He saw the supervisor, Frank, a man whose patience was as thin as the razor wire on the factory fence, stomp over to Jesse's station for the third time that shift. Frank's voice rose, sharp enough to cut through the din. "Jesse, what in God's name are you doing? We're backing up the whole line here. One more screw-up and I swear I'm sending you home." Jesse's shoulders slumped. His face, already smudged with grease, flushed crimson. He muttered an apology, a barely audible, "Sorry, Mr. Henderson," and attacked the machine with renewed, desperate energy, only to jam it again a minute later. A small, defeated whimper escaped him, almost swallowed by the machinery, but Lester heard it. And in that sound, something flickered. Lester remembered those early days. The gnawing fear of failure, the supervisors who just pointed and yelled, never truly showing. The lonely nights trying to figure out a trick on his own, wishing someone, anyone had just taken a moment to show him. Not just tell him to do better, but show him the quiet rhythms, the almost invisible tricks of the trade that made the difference between a good day and a wasted one. He looked at Jesse, shoulders slumped, desperation etched into his young face, a smear of grease highlighting a tear track near his temple. And in that moment, something inside Lester shifted. It wasn't a grand, earth-shattering revelation. No lightning bolt. It was quieter than that, more like a slow, deep exhale he hadn't realized he'd been holding for 48 years. An understanding settled in his gut. This wasn't working. His way, the old way, doing it all himself, stepping in to fix the messes and move on, it just wasn't cutting it anymore. Not for him, carrying the weight of everyone's mistakes, feeling that familiar drag on his soul, and certainly not for the young blood coming up, struggling and drowning like he once had. Enough. The word echoed, not in his ears, but in the quiet chambers of his mind. Not enough of this factory or enough of this life, but enough of this way of doing things. He saw the wasted potential, the frustration, and the isolation in Jesse, and a mirror was held up to his own life. All that quiet competence, all that perfected work, and yet he still felt like a lone island, respected but never truly connected. He was the fix-it man, not the builder. He realized, with a clarity that surprised him, that if he kept doing things the way he always had, he'd just keep getting the same results. Exhaustion, isolation, and a parade of new Jessies walking right into the same wall he'd already broken his teeth on. Something had to change. Not in the world, not in the factory, but in Lester. It was almost quitting time when he made his move. The main bell hadn't rung yet, but the hum of the machines was already starting to slow, a tired sigh before the final shutdown. Frank, the supervisor, had stormed off to complain to someone else, leaving Jesse to wrestle with the jammed machine, face still streaked, a picture of defeated resignation. Lester walked over. His boots made no sound on the oil-stained concrete. Jesse didn't even see him until he was right there, a shadow falling over his frantic hands. "Kid," Lester's voice was low, a rumble against the dying machinery. "You're muscling it. That ain't gonna work." Jesse jumped, startled, then his shoulders tensed, ready for another lecture, another dismissal. "Sorry, Mr. Henderson, I just can't seem to get it." He didn't look at Lester, instead focusing on the tangled mess of widgets. "Lester," He corrected gently, a rare, almost imperceptible softening in his tone. "Call me Lester." He paused, reaching for a small wrench on Jesse's workbench. "Look here." He didn't take over, not immediately. Instead, he pointed to a specific gear, its teeth stubbornly refusing to mesh. "See this? You're trying to push the widget into the slot. But this machine, she's a bit particular. You gotta coax it. Give it just a touch of wiggle, a little turn of the wrist, then push." Jesse watched, skeptical, then curious, as Lester demonstrated, his hands moving with an practiced grace that belied their work-hardened appearance. He placed his own hand over Jesse's, not guiding but merely showing the subtle pressure points, the angle of approach. It's not about brute force. It's about knowing the machine. She's got her own rhythm. He stepped back, handing the wrench to Jesse. "Now you try?" Jesse hesitated. He looked from the machine to the wrench to Lester's impassive face. "What if I mess it up again?" "Then you mess it up," Lester said, his voice flat but without judgment. "And then you fix it. That's how you learn." He stood there, a silent, unmoving presence, as Jesse tentatively reached for the machine, every fiber of Lester's being screamed at him to snatch the wrench, to do it himself, to make it work quickly, cleanly, perfectly, as he always had. He could feel the eyes of the few remaining workers on them, curious. He could almost hear the unspoken question, "What's Lester doing?" Not like him to waste time. His own skin prickled with the unfamiliarity of it, the inefficiency, the vulnerability of letting someone else struggle when he knew the answer. It felt like standing on the edge of a precipice, not knowing if he was about to fall or fly. Jesse fumbled. The widget caught. He swore softly, frustration boiling up again. Lester didn't flinch. "Hold on, remember what I said. The wiggle, the coaxing. Think of it like a puzzle, not a fight." Jesse took a breath, his young brows furrowed in concentration. He tried again, slower this time, mimicking Lester's subtle movements. There was a soft click. The widget slid into place. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched Jesse's lips. I did it," he whispered, sounding surprised. "Yep," Lester grunted, a flicker of something close to satisfaction warming his own chest. "Now do it again, and again, and again." The final bell rang, echoing through the emptying factory, but Lester stayed. He watched Jesse, correcting softly, patiently, not with frustration, but with the quiet determination of a craftsman teaching an apprentice. The simple principle, the understanding that had settled in his gut, was now taking root in his actions. He was building not just widgets, but something else entirely, something far more lasting. And it was harder than he thought. It felt slow. It felt like a step backward in efficiency. But as Jesse, tired but beaming, finally packed up his tools, something else, something deeper, felt profoundly right. Wishing someone, anyone, had just taken a moment to show him. Not just tell him to do better, but show him the quiet rhythms, the almost invisible tricks of the trade that made the difference between a good day and a wasted one. He looked at Jesse, shoulders slumped, desperation etched into his young face, a smear of grease highlighting a tear track near his temple. And in that moment, something inside Lester shifted. It wasn't a grand, earth-shattering revelation. No lightning bolt. It was quieter than that, more like a slow, deep exhale he hadn't realized he'd been holding for 48 years. An understanding settled in his gut. This wasn't working. His way, the old way, doing it all himself, stepping in to fix the messes and move on, it just wasn't cutting it anymore. Not for him, carrying the weight of everyone's mistakes, feeling that familiar drag on his soul, and certainly not for the young blood coming up, struggling and drowning like he once had. Enough. The word echoed, not in his ears, but in the quiet chambers of his mind. Not enough of this factory or enough of this life, but enough of this way of doing things. He saw the wasted potential, the frustration, and the isolation in Jesse, and a mirror was held up to his own life. All that quiet competence, all that perfected work, and yet he still felt like a lone island, respected but never truly connected. He was the fix-it man, not the builder. He realized, with a clarity that surprised him, that if he kept doing things the way he always had, he'd just keep getting the same results. Exhaustion, isolation, and a parade of new Jesses walking right into the same wall he'd already broken his teeth on. Something had to change. Not in the world, not in the factory, but in Lester. It was almost quitting time when he made his move. The main bell hadn't rung yet, but the hum of the machines was already starting to slow, a tired sigh before the final shutdown. Frank, the supervisor, had stormed off to complain to someone else, leaving Jesse to wrestle with the jammed machine, face still streaked, a picture of defeated resignation. Lester walked over. His boots made no sound on the oil-stained concrete. Jesse didn't even see him until he was right there, a shadow falling over his frantic hands. "Kid," Lester's voice was low, a rumble against the dying machinery. "You're muscling it. That ain't gonna work." Jesse jumped, startled, then his shoulders tensed, ready for another lecture, another dismissal. "Sorry, Mr. Henderson, I just can't seem to get it." He didn't look at Lester, instead focusing on the tangled mess of widgets. "Lester," he corrected gently, a rare, almost imperceptible softening in his tone. "Call me Lester." He paused, reaching for a small wrench on Jesse's workbench. "Look here." He didn't take over, not immediately. Instead, he pointed to a specific gear, its teeth stubbornly refusing to mesh. "See this? You're trying to push the widget into the slot. But this machine, she's a bit particular. You gotta coax it. Give it just a touch of wiggle, a little turn of the wrist, then push." Jesse watched, skeptical, then curious, as Lester demonstrated, his hands moving with an practiced grace that belied their work-hardened appearance. He placed his own hand over Jesse's, not guiding but merely showing the subtle pressure points, the angle of approach. "It's not about brute force. It's about knowing the machine. She's got her own rhythm." He stepped back, handing the wrench to Jesse. "Now you try." Jesse hesitated. He looked from the machine to the wrench to Lester's impassive face. "What if I mess it up again?" "Then you mess it up," Lester said, his voice flat but without judgment. "And then you fix it. That's how you learn." He stood there, a silent, unmoving presence, as Jesse tentatively reached for the machine, every fiber of Lester's being screamed at him to snatch the wrench, to do it himself, to make it work quickly, cleanly, perfectly, as he always had. He could feel the eyes of the few remaining workers on them, curious. He could almost hear the unspoken question, "What's Lester doing?" Not like him to waste time. His own skin prickled with the unfamiliarity of it, the inefficiency, the vulnerability of letting someone else struggle when he knew the answer. It felt like standing on the edge of a precipice, not knowing if he was about to fall or fly. Jesse fumbled. The widget caught. He swore softly, frustration boiling up again. Lester didn't flinch. "Hold on, remember what I said. The wiggle, the coaxing. Think of it like a puzzle, not a fight." Jesse took a breath, his young brows furrowed in concentration. He tried again, slower this time, mimicking Lester's subtle movements. There was a soft click. The widget slid into place. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched Jesse's lips. I did it," he whispered, sounding surprised. "Yep," Lester grunted, a flicker of something close to satisfaction warming his own chest. "Now do it again, and again, and again." The final bell rang, echoing through the emptying factory, but Lester stayed. He watched Jesse, correcting softly, patiently, not with frustration, but with the quiet determination of a craftsman teaching an apprentice. The simple principle, the understanding that had settled in his gut, was now taking root in his actions. He was building not just widgets, but something else entirely, something far more lasting. And it was harder than he thought. It felt slow. It felt like a step backward in efficiency. But as Jesse, tired but beaming, finally packed up his tools, something else, something deeper, felt profoundly right. The sheen of Jesse's first successful widget wore off quickly. The next morning it was back to square one, almost. Jesse still struggled with the nuances, the precise angles, the pressure points that made the difference between a smooth operation and a jarring, inefficient mess. Lester found himself hovering more, his own work on the assembly line falling behind. He'd glance at the clock, then at the pile of components waiting for his skilled hands, a familiar knot tightening in his stomach. He'd always prided himself on his speed, his efficiency, his ability to keep the flow moving. Now he felt like he was dragging an anchor. The profoundly right feeling from the night before seemed distant, replaced by a growing hum of anxiety in his chest. A full week had passed. Jesse was improving, no doubt. The widgets weren't perfect, but they were passable. The problem was Lester. He was tired, bone-tired. He stayed late every night patching up his own workload, making up for the hours spent demonstrating, explaining, correcting. Brenda noticed. "You're home later, Lester. Everything all right?" She'd ask, her voice soft with concern. He'd just grunt, "Fine," his mind already replaying the day's inefficiencies, the slight tremor in his hands from rushing his own tasks, the persistent ache in his shoulders. He saw his younger self in Jesse, yes, but he also saw himself, 48 years old, feeling like he was starting over, learning a new, painful way to work. He'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around him, the quiet hum of the refrigerator the only sound. "What are you doing, Lester? This is just making more work for yourself. He'll figure it out eventually. Or he won't. That's not your problem." The old mantra, familiar and comforting, tried to sneak back into his head, promising easy peace. Then came day 14. A bad day, One of those days where the machinery seemed to conspire against everyone, where every component was slightly off, every tool dulled. Jesse, trying to rush and catch up, snapped a delicate part, the brittle plastic cracking with a sound that seemed too loud in the din of the factory. A costly mistake. The supervisor, Mr. Henderson, walked by, his gaze lingering a little too long on Jesse's station, then on Lester, who was standing nearby, silently fuming. Lester felt the heat rise in his neck. His first instinct, a powerful, almost uncontrollable urge, was to grab the broken part, shove Jesse aside and really show him how a professional handles it. How to move with precision, how to anticipate, how to avoid such idiotic blunders. He could practically feel the smooth curve of the replacement part in his hand, the familiar rhythm of snapping it into place. It would take him 30 seconds. Jesse would take 5 minutes and likely break another. His jaw clenched. He could almost hear his own inner voice, low and insistent. "See, this is why you do it yourself. This is why you always do it yourself." The thought was a warm, dangerous siren song, promising a return to efficiency, to control, to the quiet satisfaction of knowing it was done right by him. He could feel the eyes of other workers, subtle glances, noticing the disruption, the broken pace. He was the anchor now, not the current. But then he looked at Jesse. The kid's face was red, a mixture of shame and despair. His hands were shaking, not with frustration this time, but with something colder, heavier. Defeat. Lester remembered that feeling acutely. The hot flush of knowing you messed up, the dread of impending failure, the desperate desire for anyone to just show you. He remembered wishing someone had taken the time, really taken the time, instead of just fixing it and moving on. Remembered the sting of being overlooked, of being deemed not worth the investment. His hands, calloused and scarred from decades of labor, remained at his sides. He took a slow, deep breath, tasting the metallic tang of the factory air. "All right," he said, his voice surprisingly calm, though it felt like a battle had just raged inside his chest. "Let's look at this. What happened here?" He gestured to the broken part, not with accusation, but with inquiry. Jesse stammered, I tried to force it, Lester. I was rushing." Lester nodded slowly. "And why were you rushing?" Jesse shrugged, avoiding eye contact. "Wanted to catch up, don't want to hold things up." "Understood," Lester said, his gaze unwavering. "But sometimes rushing is the slowest way to get something done, especially with these parts." He picked up an intact component, turning it over in his fingers. "See this here, this little ridge. It's designed to slide in, not be forced. It's a guide. Think of it like walking a tightrope. You don't run across, do you? You take your time, one step, then the next." He demonstrated again, slowly, painstakingly, the gentle pressure, the subtle twist, the audible click. Jesse watched, rapt, his shame slowly receding, replaced by that familiar, hungry look of concentration. Lester felt the exhaustion in his bones, the pressure of his own unfinished work, the weight of the day's inefficiencies. He almost gave up. Almost. But watching Jesse's eyes, seeing the flicker of understanding, a different kind of strength began to manifest. It wasn't the strength of quick fixes or personal efficiency. It was the strength of holding steady, of seeing past the immediate irritation to the deeper purpose. It was the quiet, unwavering resolve of a man building something that would outlast himself. He leaned closer, speaking just above the hum of the machinery. "You got it, kid. Take your time. We'll get there." That day and the next and the one after that, Lester kept holding steady. He kept demonstrating. He kept explaining. He kept walking Jesse through the steps, sometimes 5 times, sometimes 10, until the young man's hands began to move with a fraction of Lester's own practiced ease. Jesse still made mistakes, plenty of them. But now, when he did, Lester no longer saw a problem to fix. He saw a lesson to be learned. And he was there not to scold, but to nudge, to correct, to patiently guide the fumbling fingers back to the right path. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, something started to change on the factory floor. The frantic, almost desperate energy that had clung to Jesse began to dissipate. His shoulders, once hunched with apprehension, straightened a little. The quiet murmurs of irritation from nearby stations, once a daily soundtrack to Jesse's blunders, softened, then faded. Other workers, who'd initially cast skeptical glances at Lester's apparent waste of time, began to pause, watching the old man and the kid. They saw Lester patiently redemonstrate a sequence, not with exasperation, but with a kind of quiet determination, like a craftsman refusing to abandon a challenging piece of wood. Jesse, for his part, still had his moments of frustration, the occasional slammed tool, the muttered curse under his breath. But now he also had moments of triumph, The clean, crisp click of a perfectly seated component, the smooth whir of a correctly assembled part. Each small victory was met with a brief, affirming nod from Lester, a silent acknowledgement that meant more than any shouted praise. And with each victory, Jesse's confidence, once a brittle thing, began to solidify. He started anticipating steps, asking questions before he ran into trouble, even offering to help Lester with small, mundane tasks, a silent gesture of gratitude. Roughly 3 weeks into this new routine, Lester noticed a subtle shift in himself. The old exhaustion was still there, a constant companion, but it was different. It wasn't the draining, resentful fatigue of a man carrying all the weight himself. It was the weariness of productive effort, like the ache in muscles after a good, hard day's work in the garden. He still had his own quota to meet, his own responsibilities, but now, when he looked at Jesse, he didn't just see an additional burden. He saw an investment. He saw a future. He saw a piece of himself not just replicated, but growing. One afternoon, a conveyor belt jammed, spitting out misaligned components. The usual response would be for the line supervisor to shout for Lester, who would then swoop in, tools in hand, to diagnose and fix the issue while everyone else stood by. But this time, before the supervisor could even bark, Jesse, who was several stations down, had already moved. He knelt by the belt, his brow furrowed in concentration. He didn't just stand there. He poked, he prodded, he checked the emergency stop, then looked underneath the belt. He wasn't quite sure what he was doing, not yet, but he was thinking. He was trying. Lester watched, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. He let Jesse fumble for a moment, let him explore the problem. Only then, with a quiet step, did he approach. "See that small pin just under the drive wheel?" he murmured, pointing with a calloused finger. "Sometimes it slips, just needs a tap to reseat it." Jesse found the pin, gave it a gentle push, and with a soft groan, the conveyor belt lurched back to life. The supervisor, who had just arrived, stopped mid-stride, his mouth slightly agape. He looked from Jesse, who was now carefully checking the alignment, to Lester, who had already turned back to his own station. No words were exchanged, but a new understanding hung in the air. Weeks later, the transformation was undeniable. Jesse, the kid who had almost been fired, was now one of the most reliable hands on the line. His mistakes were rare, his efficiency a quiet hum. He even began to subtly mentor newer recruits, passing on the quiet wisdom Lester had shared, repeating phrases like, "Take your time. See that little ridge?" Lester often caught glimpses of Jesse showing someone else how to properly seat a component, his movements a mirrored echo of Lester's own, and Lester himself still looked like a man who had worked hard his entire life. The lines around his eyes were deeper, perhaps, but they now held a different kind of light. He was still quiet, still observant, but there was a new openness about him. People didn't just come to him when something was broken. They came to him with questions, with ideas, with problems they were trying to solve. "Lester, what's your take on this new batch of steel?" "Lester, how do you get this old machine to stop rattling?" He found himself offering advice, not just fixing things, and the factory floor, once a place of individual silos, began to feel more like a cohesive unit, a well-oiled machine where every part understood its role and could support the others. His own burden, the crushing weight of doing it all himself, had genuinely lightened. He wasn't overworked anymore, not in the same way. He was still busy, but it was a different kind of busy, a more purposeful, less frantic rush. He would catch himself watching the line, seeing Jesse expertly guide a part or another worker, emboldened by Jesse's example, patiently explaining something to a colleague. He wasn't just a worker on the line anymore. He was a cornerstone, a quiet architect of capability. His home still waited, modest and tidy, but he walked into it with a lighter step, carrying less of the factory's weight on his shoulders and more of its potential in his heart. The fear of being overlooked had faded. He hadn't sought recognition, but it had found him, not in loud applause, but in the steady hum of a more productive, more connected workplace. He realized that by helping Jesse build himself up, he hadn't just saved a kid's job. He'd started building something far greater, something that would last. The change wasn't a sudden explosion, but more like the slow, steady hum of a machine finally running at its optimal setting. Others started to notice, not just those on his immediate line. Supervisors, usually distant figures, would pause by Lester's station, not to correct, but to observe. Production numbers started to tick up, not dramatically, but consistently. The number of errors dipped. There were fewer frantic calls for Lester to fix a breakdown. Instead, there were requests for Lester's advice on how to prevent one. He even found himself approaching newer workers, those who hadn't yet worked with Jesse, seeing a flicker of frustration or a hint of confusion in their eyes. He'd offer a quiet word, a subtle adjustment to their grip, or patiently demonstrate a technique that made the task simpler, safer. He wasn't just fixing a problem, he was preempting one, building capability piece by painstaking piece. The atmosphere on the floor shifted. It wasn't just the machinery making noise anymore. It was the quiet confidence of people feeling capable, feeling supported. He saw a glimmer in their eyes, a spark of ownership he'd rarely witnessed before. This wasn't just a job for them anymore. It was their job, their line, their product. And Lester, in his quiet way, had lit that spark, watching it spread from one person to the next like a slow-burning fuse. Weeks bled into months. Lester was still Lester, still the man with the calloused hands and the quiet gaze. But the gaze was different now. It held less of the old burden, more of a watchful calm, a deep satisfaction that settled in his bones. He didn't just see individual tasks. He saw the intricate dance of the entire floor, recognizing potential weaknesses, but also, and more importantly, untapped strengths. He'd walk past a team struggling with a new assembly, not to step in and do it, but to observe for a moment, then point to a specific tool or suggest a different angle and watch their eyes light up as they figured it out themselves. One afternoon, the plant manager, a man named Henderson known for his clipped words and even shorter temper, stopped at Lester's station. "Lester," he said, voice surprisingly level, "what's happening on this line? Numbers are up. Scrap is down. And I've seen 3 different guys fixing the hydraulic press this week without a panic attack. What's your secret?" Lester just wiped his hands on a rag, a faint smile touching his lips. "No secret, Mr. Henderson. Just let them get their hands dirty. Show them the ropes, then let them tie the knots themselves." Henderson studied him for a long moment, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "Keep it up, Lester. Keep it up." And for the first time, Lester felt a silent, shared respect that went beyond mere competence. At home, Brenda noticed too. He wasn't as tired when he came through the door. The lines around his eyes seemed softer, less etched with fatigue. He'd talk more about his day, not just the machines, but the people. "Jesse showed old man Peterson how to recalibrate that sensor today, Brenda. Kid's got a real knack for it." His voice held a new, quiet pride. Sarah, home for a visit, commented, "Dad, you seem lighter somehow, happier." Mike, usually glued to his phone, even asked about his dad's day, listening, truly listening, when Lester explained how the new process was saving time and making the work easier for everyone. He found joy in watching others succeed, a deeper, more resonant satisfaction than merely perfecting his own task. He'd gone from being the guy who fixed everything to the guy who built capability. His hands were still tools, but now they were also guides, drawing out the latent strength in others. One evening, sitting on his porch swing with Brenda, the cicadas humming their nightly symphony, Lester finally put words to it. "You know, Brenda," he began, his voice rough but thoughtful, "all my life I believed if you wanted something done right, you had to do it yourself. And I spent years doing just that. Fixing, building, shouldering it all, feeling like I was the only one who truly cared." He paused, looking out at the darkening street, a faint breeze rustling the leaves. "But the truth is, if you want something to last, if you want real strength, you gotta show someone else how to build it. Give them the tools, stand back a bit, and let them get their hands dirty. Let them make their own mistakes, find their own way. That's how things really get built, Brenda. Not just by one pair of hands, strong as they might be, but by a whole team, all of them knowing what they're doing, knowing why." He looked at her, his eyes clear and full of a peaceful conviction. "That's how you build something that won't fall apart the minute you step away. That's how you build influence that means something, that actually sticks." And so it was. Less